to our Is the Mic On webinar. We have a large crowd today, so it's going to be a moment before everybody enters the room and a moment before I introduce our panel. Again, thanks for coming to today's webinar. It's part of an regular series we have called Is My Mic On? And it's hosted by the Masters of Science program in Human Resources here at Florida International University. So my team is here. They'll be entering information in the chat area. Every so often, someone appear in the panelist area who leaves. Don't be too concerned about that. At this moment here, we have 118 participants, but I see my meter continuing to grow, so I'm going to stall for just 30 seconds again to welcome you. While you're waiting, I'm going to ask my team to type in a few domains for you. For anybody interested in the College of Business, we have a large number of specialized master's degree, including in real estate, where over the years, Dean Hardin has poured a lot of effort and work into it and built a great program. We have a master's in international business. We have masters in finance. And oh yeah, of course, I mentioned the Masters of Science in Human Resources. Okay, at this point, knowing that some people are still filtering in, I think I want to get started with some of our introductions. My name is Mark Weinstein. I'm the faculty director of the HR program. I've been at FIU since 2007 and came from the University of Oregon, and I'm really delighted to be here. For those of you who have attended our In the Mic webinars in the past, it's not just about HR, but we really transcend the concerns of the HR function to talk about organizational challenges. And that's what we're going to do today. We have our webinar today, titled Great Resignation or Great Renegotiation to Keep Talent. And the question is, will 2022 be the year of the Great Renegotiation? Is a renegotiation just about compensation, or is it about more broadly making work a good place to be and sort of employment branding? At this point, I want to introduce our panel. We're joined today by Maureen Shea, CEO and co-founder of Right Management, Florida Caribbean. This is Florida's first outplacement firm, and it's now part of the larger Manpower Group. Maureen has been past president of SHRM HRABC. She's been inducted into its Hall of Fame. She's also been inducted into the Nova Southeastern University Entrepreneur and Business Hall of Fame. Makes me think that we should have a Hall of Fame here at FIU. In any case, Maureen and her company have just a list of honors, 9 consecutive years as being the best employer, she being named the ultimate CEO, and the Commonwealth Institute has mentioned her many times as a top female business leader. And in fact, has won the top women business award for 5 consecutive years. I also like to introduce someone who I've known for quite a long time. She is on our advisory board, and that is Maribel Dees. Maribel is Senior Vice President for Human Resources at Visa, where she's been there for 25 years in an increasingly complex set of jobs. She has a master's degree from our program, as well as a newly minted doctorate degree from FIU for our new Doctors of Business Administration program. And then we have our dean, and my colleague, Professor William Hardin, who is not only dean of our college, but also the associate dean of our Chapman Graduate School of Business, where I've really gotten to work with him over the years. We're really fortunate to have someone as Bill as our leader at the College of Business. And I'm not just softening up for my own renegotiation with him. Bill is the 3rd most productive researcher in the field of real estate. He has over 50 peer review articles. He has a PhD from Georgia State, but also a master's degree from Georgia State and the University of South Carolina, where he has an MBA. He came to FIU in 2006, and I think is almost single-handedly responsible for building our strong real estate program here at the university. Now, my last check, we didn't have quite Matt on the line. Has Matt joined us at this point? Great. And we have Matt Arsenault, from Baptist South Florida, where he's the executive vice president and chief financial officer, not quite the CEO yet, of Baptist Health South Florida. Matt joined Baptist Health in 2006, the same year that Bill Hardin joined us here at FIU. And Matt has really a huge span of responsibility at Baptist Health, oversees supply chains, M&A activities, and I was also responsible for the treasury team and investment portfolio at Baptist Health. Matt holds a master's degree in accounting from FIU, but I also want to mention he has a degree in education from the University of Portland, a master's degree. I spent many years at the University of Oregon, so that means something to me. I also have a master's degree in teaching as well, later followed by my PhD in management. But in any case, welcome everybody. And again, just to let you all know, we are now joined by 165 people. So I'd like to begin the discussion by asking Maureen, from her position, as to whether there's reasons to think that the labor shortages that we're experiencing from the Great Resignation, whether it's transitory or whether this is a reality that American and Florida employers are going to have to be dealing with for the next few years.
So I have the luxury of being part of Manpower Group, and they are unbelievable with their research. So I'm going to share some statistics from their recent employment outlook survey that they do globally to 39,000 employers around the globe, both public and private. So just to give you some idea as to where the economy is and what the job market looks like right now and what we're in for, at least for the first quarter, it's astounding. So for the first time in 60 years, the positive employment outlook is off the charts. And so everyone is looking at hiring, which is fantastic in all 40 countries. So therein lies the problem of how do we fill all these positions, right? Certainly in North America, there's a robust market. 57% of our companies plan to hire. 25% are going to stay the same, and 16% expect to lay off workers. So that's a small percentage. And growth is expected across all 11 industries. So growth is everywhere. The largest one, 50% is banking and finance, followed by, IT and technology is 60. And then banking and finance is 50%, and construction is 41%. So lots of opportunity in all of these companies. So our HR team is going to be incredibly busy making sure that we find the talent that we need. 50% of the companies hiring are really the large employers, 250 or more, and then 40% of those medium-sized companies will be hiring, and then it gets smaller as we go into the smaller companies. The outlook's strong across all regions, 45% growth in Northeast, 47% in the West, 35% in the Midwest, and 37% in the South. So everyone is hiring, and couple that with the fact that everyone can work anywhere today, it really is a very unique opportunity for our autonomous employees.
Yeah,
so
of course.
There are the stats. So there we go.
There we go. Now, I know the healthcare industry, even prior to the pandemic, was facing labor shortages. Then, of course, there's COVID, which increases the demand. And then, obviously, this is not a job that could go remote. So I'm wondering how Baptist is surviving in this environment.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, it's definitely been a challenge, just like all healthcare organizations and providers throughout the country. Really, and a lot of it is not only the shortage of labor due to people having opportunities, higher paying opportunities, to being able to move throughout the country, as the pandemic moved, but just the stress of the job itself, dealing with not only the pandemic and the wave of patients at the bedside, but also the stress of misinformation that's out there in the community about various aspects of the pandemic has really weighed on our frontline caregivers. So you've seen a lot of retirements, which really exacerbated a lot of that and higher turnover, much higher turnover than normal. And in healthcare in general as well, it is not one of those jobs that can be really automated or you can take advantage of digital transformation initiatives in the same way. If you are ill, you need a doctor to see you and individually assess and diagnose you, and you want a nurse at your bedside there. So really, it's one of those jobs that obviously using initiatives to help make those caregivers do their jobs easier. But really, the demand has been unrelenting. And then the macro factors, not only retirement, but also just the decline in immigration, exacerbated by lack of travel in the pandemic. That was a consistent source of clinical labor and people, is folks coming from other areas and other countries to work, is something that's also made it even more difficult during the pandemic.
I have a hypothesis out there, and Maribel, maybe you could tell me whether or not this is wrong, that employers that have been able to brand themselves well as an employer, maybe aren't suffering quite the same challenges as those companies that maybe have had a bit of a more transactional view of how they handle personnel and administration. You have any thoughts about that?
So I'll meet you halfway.
Okay.
Your hypothesis is partially right, but not exactly. One of the things that we find that is creating a bit of a strain is this new gig economy that we're faced with. So we have a generation of Zoomers or Gen Zs that are highly, highly entrepreneurial. So they're going to want to tap into that. They're going to want to tap into these, and Maureen said it best. What is it? 61% is in the technology field. We have startups happening in our own backyard. We have all sorts of fintechs popping up, this whole crypto phenomenon. So employees are going to want to be part of that. They're going to be, or candidates are going to want to tap into that. So I don't think that it's so much the branding, which helps a lot. It's more of what these new generations want and what they're going to flock towards. No doubt, if you have an established company with a great track record, with robust compensation plans and leadership programs and trainings and all that good stuff, they're going to think about leaving twice. And also, how did these companies treat their employees during the phenomenon that we have never ever lived through ourselves? Were they caring enough? Did they watch out for burnout? Did they care for mindfulness? I mean, all of these things are part of this huge retention strategy, if you will, that employees are going to remember when it comes time to really seek their joy and their happiness, which is something that we need to have front and center because they're motivated differently.
Right, which sort of leads me to the next area of exploration. I sort of mentioned in my intro is I do think to some extent every organization is going to be involved with renegotiating with their top performers. Listen, you have great people in your organizations, you hire them, right? So they are good. And, and I'm sure we feel this more at a state institution, a high inflation environment with, state budgets. There's only so much we could do, for instance, in terms of increasing compensation. But you were mentioning, Maribel, that people are looking for other things. So I want to sort of ask each of you what your own organizations are doing to sort of retain talent, whether it's an explicit renegotiation or whether you guys are starting to reconceptualize, whether it should be a hybrid workplace. So anyway, Maribel, I'll go ahead and just have you sort of continue your thought there and to give me your thoughts and we'll move around.
Yeah. How do I say this? And it's not just specific to Visa. This is happening worldwide, and I have been educating myself. It's a topic that I'm really interested in, and now the research geek has awakened after getting my doctoral degree. But what I find is that there's no silver bullet, and there's not a single solution. Companies are solving as they go. I don't recall in my tenure or in my career in human resources being faced with anything like this. So the pandemic has forced companies to experiment, first off, with this whole remote work. There were some companies, the more traditional ones, that were very presential. You needed to be in the office 5 days a week. Otherwise, how can I account for the work that you're doing? And that changed one day to the next. Sometime in February, maybe March for others. And now companies were pushed into this remote environment, and it has worked. So it has changed the mindset of a lot of companies for future work, which is a good thing. And the whole hybrid thing is being defined. Depends what company you work for. Some roles cannot go remote. Some roles you need to be there. So the other thing that I found, excuse me, in my research is that it really depends. There are some folks, 43% to be exact, that appreciate the hybrid approach. 20% do not want to work remote ever. And then the 37 want to do nothing but remote. And this is based on a study that Bain did, which I thought was really, really interesting. So there is a downside to this whole remoteness, which is, how do I cut off my work life to my personal life? And I feel that that's going to be a struggle, and it will exacerbate the whole mindfulness and well-being of the employees. So what is the culture that you're trying to instill in the organization, and how do you translate that to folks that do want to work remote? So it is forcing, no doubt, leaders how to approach their talent. When we look at these up and coming generations, the Zoomers, which are the Gen Zs and the Millennials, in some cases, the pandemic has been an example of what sociologists are now referring to as the collective trauma. And they just have never been educated on how to cope with this. So companies are over investing in most cases in wellness activities, especially in the last couple of years. And winning companies are going to train leaders on how to embrace this new reality, how to care for your employees, which was a cornerstone of my dissertation, is that along with the leader having to grapple with meeting their objectives, meeting their goals, now they have another layer of complexity, which is, how do I lead these generations? And there's so many of them that they're going to overtake the workforce in less than 10 years. So they have to show up a certain way, and they need to, first and foremost, care for them, which before it was, let's dive right in when we would start a meeting. Now it's like, how are you doing? What did you do this weekend? Tell me what's happening in your personal life, which was unheard of. And some leaders are not good in this space. So now they have to shift their mindset in how do I lead and retain these talents, and also development.
Yeah.
What will retain people, I feel, and help them is just that. And let's double click on that for a second. It's just not going to a stand-up training.
Yeah.
It's that these generations are so scared of becoming obsolete because of the digital world that they navigate in, that they just want to learn and learn and learn. And it could be web-based training. It could be these flash trainings that are less than 4 hours. Gone are the days of those marathon training sessions for 3 full days or week long. It's just not going to work. So it's finding what makes your employees tick and really understand what they're looking for, and how do we adapt to that?
Yeah, certainly not one solution. I have the great fortune when I first got to Florida in 2007, 2008, to visit Baptist Health as a researcher. And I must say, after the initial interviews, I almost wanted to apply to a job at Baptist Health. I mean, Baptist Health has such a strong, good employee culture. And of course, that was years ago. But Matt, the healthcare sector is under such stress. Are there special initiatives that you are doing in your organization to offer some relief to employees, to help them stay in the organization when they might want to otherwise leave?
Yeah, definitely. That's we've been 20 consecutive years on the Fortune 100 best companies to work for in America. It's something that senior leadership takes very, very seriously, in that we believe that is just an award that recognizes kind of the trusting relationship that we want to build with our employees, right? And really it comes down to, and one of the things, especially during the pandemic, like we said we weren't going to lay people off during the pandemic, and we tried to do that, offering free mental health counseling to those frontline caregivers that were impacted. I think where we are now is really this idea of reinforcing our company values. What is it? What do we stand for as an organization, and trying to be very clear with our employees that to engage them with that so that they understand, because we think that's right. Pay, you have to be market competitive. That I think is table stakes. But okay, what does it mean to work for our organization? Healthcare. A lot of people go into healthcare because they do have, there's a value in that, in the desire to help people, and leadership has to really be out in front to do that. We are opening and have various different business resource groups to help connect with people with the organization. I'm the chair of the multi-generational. I'm one of the youngest senior executives on the group. So we have a multi-generational business resource group, which, all right, how do we attack problems of the organization from a multi-generational perspective with that? And it's important, but it's very hard during a time of high turnover where you are now to keep that culture, because a lot of that has been passed on through in-person interaction. So as you move to mobile, how do you do that? And really, it just means that you have to be more disciplined and prescriptive on things that might have just come naturally before. So that's what we're trying to really do. And a big part with those that are mobile in the support staff, in the back office teams and the supply chain teams, not the front line, is when they are in the office, make it meaningful, make it impactful, make people feel that human connection of being part of that team. And so they feel they're valued and part of that. So it's really trying to give that more focus to things that were just a normal part. Right? Our CEO, Brian Keeley, like the famous thing is we have a no jerks policy at Baptist Health, right? I mean, it's part of, you just have to treat people right. And it's not acceptable to be like that. Well, now you have to, so it worked when you're interacting every day, but now it's all right. You have to be more meaningful
Right.
and prescriptive in trying to have people understand what it means to be part of it.
Yeah. Now, in the College of Business and FIU more broadly, and throughout the state of Florida, there's a lot of institutions like FIU, institutions which are state funded. As I mentioned, we're in a situation, appropriately, we're limited at the university in terms of how we could expand our pay. This is a challenge, I'm sure, for our executive leadership. I know because I'm part of these conversations. But I was wondering if our Dean, Bill Hardin, could speak a little bit about what FIU is doing in this context, because there are a few initiatives here.
Yeah, I think that, and I know, Mark, you and I have talked about it, and I talk with everybody. We just can't wave a wand and get a appropriation from the state. Our tuition is set by the legislature, so we can't raise prices, and so inflation is problematic for us. We benefit because a lot of people choose us because we have a great benefits package, we have a great work environment, and they're mission driven, which is they're driven by supporting the community, supporting Miami, South Florida, whatever the school they're affiliated with. And I think that's one of the things that we're talking about today, is how do you have that engagement and affinity for where you work. So I think we have a kind of a benefit there. Specifically, what we're looking at, of course, is, as you know, we have hybrid, and we've codified how we do hybrid. Our goal is to make that accessible and equitable across the board, which is, it's not in essence a special thing for a special person. It's an institutionalized version. We have implemented in the College of Business in certain areas a way to measure performance, which can be done. The performance can be done remotely. We have a number of positions that really are interactive, but are primarily not what we call student facing. So we've been able to do that well. We've incorporated some very specific ladder type programs for entry-level employees, so that they know if they come in, and they do this and they do this and they do that, they can see a 2 to 3 to 5 year, in essence, progression, which would lead to higher pay, responsibilities, and skill set, which we've taken it. When I came as associate dean 4 years ago, we started that for our recruitment teams. We've done it for our program managers. And the other thing is we are trying to reach out to make sure that our student workers know how to get into the pipeline, and also how our employees know how to reach out and get positions within FIU, which is we hire internally. So, and that's, and also I will tell you, we know that if someone stays here and gets our skill set, they're very employable long term if they choose to go into more of a private sector. So those are kind of the big things that we look at. I think what we want to do is more with fewer people, which is beneficial in the sense that we can have a better compensation package for fewer people. Whereas I think in the past, people always talked about headcount and expanding. I think what we want to do is have a little bit fewer positions that pay a little bit better, that have a little bit more challenge to them long term, so people are excited about it. But I think what we've done now is, as you've seen, is recently as we've had the hybrid over the pandemic, we've codified exactly how that does. It's formal within our program, and I think probably within the graduate programs here, it's going to be 60 or 70% or more that have some type of hybrid component. But I'm going to throw out the last thing that hadn't come up that maybe we want to talk about is what are those issues outside our organizations that are causing problems, such as childcare. I mean, if you look at my staffing and probably Matt's and in some of the nursing areas where you have young people coming into that profession, childcare is a major issue. And I think that's where where we're trying to figure that one out.
And it's certainly reflecting the data. If you look at female labor force participation, it hasn't bounced back as male labor force participation has. And it's difficult to say it's not related to childcare issues. I know as an employee stakeholder at FIU, I was really impressed with the agile work plan that came out. Having been at FIU for 12 years, I can't quite always say we've been so agile in new programs, but I was very impressed with how quickly this was formulated. And I think it's going to be a bit of glue for us to keep people really engaged in our organization. Now, Maureen, if I recall from meeting a number of people who've gone through Right Management, you work with people who are late career, more mature career transitions sometimes. In other words, we have Maribel working with a lot of young employees, and as an outplacement company, it's inevitable you get a lot of executives who, my sense is, they land in Florida, and then they have another promotion opportunity, but they maybe don't want to follow it to Boise or somewhere else. So I was wondering what some of the older employees might be looking for in terms of renegotiating work. For them, it's not always compensation either. And you have to unmute yourself there, Maureen. Yeah.
So it's really not about age as much as it is about opportunity and the world of work as we see it today. Okay. So what's very interesting in 2020, obviously the outplacement business is incredibly busy because so many companies had to lay people off because of the financial drain that the pandemic caused initially. And what is incredibly crazy is that the world of remote work totally opened up, and that a number of our executives and non-executives were interviewing remotely, number one, which had never been done before, and number two, being offered jobs remotely, and number three, taking jobs in Iowa and not having to move. So it's a very different workplace, which again makes it harder for our HR teams when they need to employ people, because now you're not only competing locally, but you're competing everywhere. So it's great for talent, not so great when, you know, the salaries in Florida are a little bit less than perhaps in the Northeast. So it's been an interesting ride, to say the least, from that perspective.
Okay.
So in general, there has been a movement, as Maribel said. The younger folks are looking at being entrepreneurs, looking at what's available for them. Some of our generations, I think a couple months ago, the president of the Retirement Association was at the chamber and told us that 10,000 people are retiring every day. So if that many people are retiring every day, coupled with the loss of the female workplace, which hasn't bounced back because so many of our females did leave because of childcare, family care. And it's crazy because childcare is difficult, but also Maribel mentioned the mental health issues that our children are facing and our families are facing with the pandemic. So it's a world that there is no playbook. And so being an instinctual leader and making decisions quickly, I think, is really critical. And as Maribel and Matt said, you know, there's no such thing as a jerk in our company, and we really do need to care. And I think that's really compelling in this market now.
Okay. I'm going to take the advantage of Maribel's recent training to test another hypothesis with her. And again, you know, I want everybody to weigh in if they want. And then this question will be followed not by just the responses of the panelists, but then we'll move into a Q&A section where we bring everybody in. So this hypothesis I have, Maribel, is showing my age a bit. You know, so when I was at the University of Oregon in 1996, and I was asked to lead an HR master's program there, my recommendation was to dissolve it and say, you know, we want our people in HR to get MBAs and, you know, be part of the business. And you could get an MBA and become a manager in lots of different things. Of course, fast forward 20 years and I find myself the director of a master's program. And I could certainly understand why in the last 20 years, if anything, HR has become more complex, but within that complexity also become a lot of more administration stuff, a lot of transactional stuff. And certainly looking at a lot of employers, it seemed hire people who are already trained, if you will, because they're out there and they're on reserves. And I felt at times, at least some organizations, HR got a little bit, you know, not lazy. I mean, they're only doing what they're asked to do, but they weren't really asked to contribute as much to the strategic direction of the company as they could. And so I like to think that to some extent, you know, tight labor markets will create a renaissance for HR, where HR managers are going to really have to share their nettle, not just being efficient in terms of hiring and firing, but really creating workplaces where people want to stay. And so I wanted to see if you could comment on that a bit.
So what's your hypothesis, though?
So my hypothesis is that to some extent, a lot of companies are flat-footed because our HR functions candidly do not have the human capital to provide the value added, in part because they haven't been asked to. And that with tight labor markets, it may create an opportunity for, you know, HR managers with greater strategic perspectives to sort of step up and make greater contributions.
Well, I'm biased. Let me try to be as objective as possible, because HR has been evolving. In some cases, like in Visa, we're no longer HR, we're the people team. That in and of itself talks about the evolution of the function. I like to consider myself personally as a business person who happens to do HR. One of our number one objectives is to generate revenue. And some people have the audacity to say that HR does not generate revenue. Contraire, we are in charge of the most important asset of the organization. We decide who comes in, we decide how to put together plans on how to reward them and how to retain them. And we also have a very strong voice in how we're going to develop them. So I feel that the pendulum is shifting. I feel that HR more than ever has played a protagonist role with this whole pandemic, because while the leaders' hair was on fire figuring out, oh my God, what are we going to do? There's a pandemic. We had to step it up. And we had to drive to ensure that the remoteness thing was going to work. We were front and center in identifying roles. We were front and center of launching all of these wellness programs and really had our fingers to the pulse. And I'm speaking collectively because I truly in my heart feel that this is the role that HR or people teams played while in the past 2 years. And you know what? We haven't had a break. We've been on since day one, and we're still on because there's still companies that are not going to go back until the middle of the year. So we're going to have our second anniversary of dealing with this pandemic. But I feel that the HR function no doubt has evolved and is even stronger now because of the pandemic. Granted, the tactical and the compliance is always going to be there because we are in charge of keeping companies safe, right? But I feel that for certain roles and certain levels within the HR organization, it's shifted, and it has a more strategic tone to it.
Okay, good. Matt, do you have anything to add to that? And I'm curious, at Baptist, does the chief vice president or the top person for HR in the organization, does that person report to the CEO, or does that person report to somebody else?
To the CAO, our chief HR officer is senior vice president Adrian McCoy, who's amazing. And, she and I are, to say that we talk all the time is the understatement, right? Labor is for healthcare organization, it's 50% of our cost is labor. So it's such a critical component of us partnering, and really kind of circles back, such a key thing is communication, and that, as Maribel said, that professional development. It's such a key component. We've been making big investments in leadership development, leadership coaching, because if you, right, the number one reason, at least, the number one reason people leave their job is because of their boss, and we are strong believers in that our leaders are expected to be great leaders. So we invest heavily to help them be great leaders, and help our staff that want to be leaders to get the great skills to do that. So that has really been, when you talk about strategic HR, that's been a big focus in our organization, is you have to have great leaders, because then they can help, in all aspects of the organization, in people that are new, and help them be successful in their job, and to grow. So we've been doing that. I think that's paid great dividends, not only in retention, but just in the culture of the organization, and a happier workforce.
Yeah. Maureen, what have you observed? Any changes in the last couple of years pointing to a shift of HR focus?
So absolutely, the first thing HR had to do is make sure that everybody was safe and healthy, and how to manage that. So I think that was a big hurdle that everybody learned pretty quickly. But what's interesting is in early 2021, we did a study, 26,000 people are in 40 countries, and what do workers want? And so there were really 10 things that we're all juggling as HR folks. First is more pay. Well, it's not first, but just in general, because it's all over the board in terms of who you speak to. But more pay, flexible hours, challenging work. They want to further their career. They want a strong brand. They want to develop their skills. They want it to be a good place to work. They want to have a good boss. They want to have a shorter commute, flexible location, and a great team. So that is a lot to say. Okay,
good. I'm so glad that my boss is on the panel here, because I know he heard all of it. Great. At this point, I'm going to shift. First of all, I want to thank all of you. We have 213 participants, and usually you see people sort of drift away. We have had this number of people for the last 15 minutes, so it's thank you so much for staying with us. Certainly, we're speaking to an audience that has questions as well, and so I'm going to ask a few of these questions. Some of them are directed to specific panelists. Some of them are broader, and so we have one here for Matthew, and that is, I'm going to read it here. Should an applicant pursue an opportunity if the organization is not transparent with the salary and pay during the initial stages? Is lack of transparency a concern? Or maybe you could just tell us what you think is best practice in this early stage as people are looking for new opportunities.
I think it depends on the position and on the role and how they do that. I mean, I think part of, I guess I'm not understanding the question. Is that something that should be an expectation upon?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So let me see. Not my question. So I'm gonna have to make sure I got it correct here as I'm reading it. So I think the question is somebody's seeking advice. I guess they're looking for you for this advice. And they're saying, I'm interviewing for a job and they're very cagey about what they're going to pay in this initial interview. They're not entirely being transparent. And people are sort of, is that an early warning sign or is that to be expected?
Yeah, I don't know that it's necessarily early warning sign of anything. I would say, especially today, in today's environment, it's not unexpected that that's part of the conversation, the interview, just because of, obviously right now it is it's an interesting environment in dealing with pay and salary, and right, there are certain roles that are much higher demand than others. There are certain roles that you can figure out, how do we make do with what we have in this area now? So we are not maybe going to increase the rates and things like that. So it's not surprising that that's kind of something that candidates are encountering as they go through that, because as I said, I think it kind of just depends on the job and how that is. So
yeah, my sense is people are trying to figure out this new market. Are there thoughts from other panelists, or I can move on to another question on this?
Let me answer that a little bit, Mark. I think part of the difficulty is if you look at titles across industries, there's some complexity there, which is in finance and in other areas. A title such as a director or managing director could be one of the top people in a division. I think if you look at other areas, it's not the same level of responsibility. So I think one of the issues that you see, and we see it in government work as well, and in the university setting, there are a lot of titles, and so that makes it difficult. But what you do on the recruitment side and on the planning side is make that people aware of what that job description is on the front end, so that it matches up, so you don't have a misalignment of expectations on kind of what level the job is. But I think we've seen that in the college because we have, we have a lot of titles. Let's just say we have a lot of titles. So, but I think it's the position description helps eliminate that when people see it.
Good. I'm going to move on to another question. This question is for Dr. Dees, okay? And it's has to do with wage transparency, and there are different state laws governing wage transparency. Visa works in all 50 states, obviously. What are your thoughts in general about, Maribel's experience that, what are the limits in terms of wage transparency or requirements for wage transparency, and how is that impacting your work now?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because we do have representation in most 50 states, and in some states we cannot ask the employee what their salary history has been. So from a staffing perspective, we really, and it's done for a very noble cause. It's done so that you pay the candidate what they're worth, not what they used to pay. What if they come from a job where they were paid horribly, or it's an industry that just doesn't pay well? So this is really truly paying for what the experience and whatever skills they have is truly worth. What we do as an organization is we do just that. We want to make sure that we're aligned to the market. We want to make sure that we have competitive salary ranges, and our information is fresh. We go out there and work off survey data very, very, very aligned and frequently. So what I would say to that is, when we go out and we are filling a role, we pay for what the person is worth, no doubt. And now candidates are very savvy, right? They are negotiating.
That is correct.
It's all over. I don't know, but to the youngins, who's on TikTok? TikTok has given a playbook on how to negotiate salaries, how to show up, what are the interview questions that you need to be ready for, how to answer them. It's wonderful. It's a great source of information. And some people diss it. I happen to love it, and I need to be on it because I need to know what's trending and what's out there. And there are tutorials on how to negotiate for roles. So we're dealing with a very sophisticated candidate nowadays, and as organizations, we need to buy the talent at what they're worth.
Yeah. Now, of course, everyone on the panel, I think, would say, the way you retain employees is making your workplace a great place to work, whether it's through development opportunities, whether it's through being mission driven, but also we know a lot of employers are trying to use non-compete covenants. So we have a question about non-compete covenants. And the question is, how and when is it appropriate to use them? And do you have any guidance, for people who feel that maybe they signed a non-compete covenant, which is a bit too overbearing?
I think we need a lawyer on the panel, Mark, to answer that question.
Yes. Has that been an issue with trying to place individuals you've worked with, or not?
It definitely comes up in terms of the non-compete that you committed to sign, and then you're moving on. And oftentimes that's a negotiable matter too. You can go back to your former employer and ask to be released from the non-compete. But our experience has been is that folks that sign those non-competes do take it literally and carefully. So they want to honor and abide by it. So if there's an opportunity for them to get released sooner, they look towards that for the most part.
Maribel, you have something to add to that?
No, I defer to the lawyers.
Okay, good. I could say it, and I'm not a lawyer. I think, we have had instances with low wage, low skill employers like sandwich shops try to impose these. And it's quite clear the Department of Labor is going to look askance at that. But at the same time, clearly, there is a need for non-competes in some industries. And I think it's a question that they're fair, not punitive.
And certainly the non-competes are typically found at the very higher salary level individuals, where the trade secrets and the confidential information is important. To your point, Mark, if it was someone at a lower level, then that probably wouldn't hold up.
Good. Okay, I'm going to divert my eyes because I have a whole list of questions from our crowd here, so I'm going to skim one and pick it out. And we have someone who has a question about mental health here. And so I'm going to sort of read it out here. And it says, I'm glad you mentioned mental health. This is a serious issue, not only for adults facing this dilemma, but sort of the whole dilemma of the Great Resignation. Let's see. And so the question is, do you think it's appropriate for, let me see, make sure I got this question right here. I'm sorry. So I was just going to raise, therefore, do you think it's appropriate for children should also be part of the conversation? And it's to this person, she says, or he says, it's like a bit of a post-war situation where, the consequences of sort of stress, permeate. And I know Baptists, I was very impressed. I was working on a wellness initiative or watching what you guys were doing at Baptist. And, in this particular case, Baptist was working with individuals who were overweight and had this insight that, it's probably the whole family, that might be overweight. And Baptist, if you will, is concerned about this. And this particular intervention at Baptist sort of looked at, working with the family to develop better eating habits, visit a home, help, maybe the grandmother pick healthier food and such. So Baptist has some tradition of, sort of embracing wellness beyond the employee. To what extent has that also been true in something like mental health? It's a sensitive issue, obviously.
Yeah, it's definitely something that is you know, an area that we're investing more and more in. You know, the concept of the whole family, you know, part of the big challenges is really, you know, we talk about labor shortage, huge shortage of mental health providers, you know, throughout the community. It is very, very hard to have access for that. So, you know, that's one of the things that, you know, obviously our focus has been on the frontline caregivers impacted, but families and everybody as well. You know, that's one of the areas where we're really trying to leverage digital health. Right. You know, we have our Care on Demand app is there for emergency care, but also for, you know, for mental health. And, you know, it's difficult, right? I mean, the ideal, I think, is in person, but we do have received a lot of favorable positive feedback on that. So it's the idea of how do you have access to that? But again, that is a broader, I think, public health challenge that we have in the country is a lack of sufficient amount of mental health providers to really provide that care, because that's professional care. It's not something that can be entrusted to just anyone in doing that. So that's something that, you know, it's with what we have access and the ability to try to do, we are trying to make an impact.
Yeah. So we sort of began the conversation with my posing this question as to, you know, whether the tight labor markets are a feature of our economy that we're going to have to deal with for the next few years, or is it entirely transitory? And my sense is, you know, these labor markets are going to remain tight for at least the next year or two, if not longer. Another question that people ask from the audience, I've received a few questions, still comes back to this issue of remote work and hybrid workplaces. And so there is sort of a question out there whether or not the hybrid workplace, like I think we're evolving here at FIU, is here to stay, or over time will we see sort of a reversion back to old norms where the expectation is that there's a lot of face time? I know there's going to be industry differences there.
So I would say that from the surveys that we do, that remote work is here to stay. And if you don't accept that, then you will not be able to fill the roles that you have. Now, obviously, as Maribel pointed out, or as Matt knows in the hospital, all your workers can't be remote. But to be able to give those workers that are frontline workers a little bit of time off, so they have that same feeling is good advice for us. But it's definitely here to stay. And what we've learned is that not only your employees, but your managers need some support in getting ready for how to work hybrid and work it remotely to the best of everybody's ability. So having some training in that area is really healthy. And also the remote piece, I think we talked about this before, you take away the personal piece. So if you build in that personal socialization as you're doing the remote, it does take the place of it. And not 100% for those of us that love to be out and about, but it really does help.
Yeah. Now, I have a sense that, you know, remote work is here to stay, or hybrid work is here to stay at FIU. I'm going to turn to our dean to see if, you know, from your perspective, but you have recommendations for managers on how to manage, you know, the balance, you know, with a hybrid agile workforce.
Yeah, I think that's the challenge in the near term, is to train whether it's a mid manager or a first line supervisor on how to actually make sure work's being done and that it's equitable. So I think I wish I could tell you I could wave a wand and say we're there. I think what we're doing is individually, and as we approve any hybrid work, which is, it has to be approved at a supervisory and above. Number one is we have a policy that we've put in place that we've circulated that outlines how it is approved and who is, you know, who can have access to it. So I think we've done that, but I think we're going to have to learn how to manage people that way. We've had a good year and a half or 2 years doing that, but I think we'll all admit that over those 2 years, we found things that worked and we found things that didn't work. We have to figure out how to do it, and depending on your team, you're going to do it differently. So I think what we've learned is there's no one size that fits all, depending on the job. There's certain jobs that we do that have to do with interaction with students, for example, student advisement. What we found is when we went to remote with Zoom or WebEx type technology and we set up undergraduate advisement, the percent of students that actually showed up increased dramatically, which is the students will show up for that 20-minute Zoom, okay, or 15, whatever it is, the time slot. And I can't remember the number, but it was multiple 20, 30%. Let's say if we were at 55 or 60%, we're at 75, 80% people who show up for those advisement sessions. And we can monitor that because basically it's easy to monitor. So we have that. And then we have more of maybe a more creative type positions where they're working on projects. And I think that's where we're going to have to spend a little bit more time making sure that we're on that. We do have goals and objectives there, so it's easy to see if it doesn't happen, but you want to know when the problem is, not after you want to know if there's a forthcoming problem as opposed to a problem. So I think we're going to have to get some training on that.
Yeah, and certainly, and maybe Maribel, you could sort of answer this as sort of the last question here, is we want individual employees to be able to work remotely, but not at the whim of a specific manager's preference, right? You know, so in other words, here at FIU, it requires management approval. Now, I haven't heard of any problems, but imagine I might be working for a very conventional manager who really doesn't want to sign off on a hybrid work arrangement. Is there work from the HR function that you have in working with these managers who, you know, might be reluctant to this? Or how do you resolve those issues that someone might be working for one manager who's very, let's say, inflexible about this? Yeah, traditional.
Traditionalist, perhaps. Okay, so let me dissect that question, Mark, because I see that it has different parts to it. Going back to the initial, I think that this hybrid model is here to stay. And why am I using the word hybrid? Because it depends. One thing for sure is that we as leaders need to be very compelling when asking people to come back to the office. We need to create experiences for them. We need to show and demonstrate, because now we have to program them to maybe in some cases come back. We need to show them the value of that human connectivity. We need to show them the value of having meetings in person, troubleshooting, resolving issues quicker than it would if you were remote. It would probably take 20 emails or 2 days. Whereas if you grab someone walking down the hall, you can resolve something in 10 minutes. That's the first thing. As far as making it meaningful, we need to say, this is why you get up and grapple with traffic. This is why you do this. Let's have a cup of coffee together. Let's have some lunch. Make that whole community spirit very meaningful for them to say, yeah, it's worth it. It's worth me driving down twice a week, 3 times a week to be with my peers, because you know what? I forgot about what that felt like. And it's better than sitting at home in front of a monitor and not knowing when to switch off. That's what I think we're going to evolve to. We're going to evolve to this hybrid type of situation. And the remoteness, it depends. It depends on whether the employee has a team, whether they need to visit clients, so some roles, they can be remote, but others, it depends. And that's a gray area that some leaders don't feel comfortable, even employees don't feel comfortable in navigating, but that's our reality. And we're learning as we go. Listen, we've tried to come back as a nation to work. We've tried to come back many times over. And then what happens? We have a second wave of COVID. Then we have the Omicron happen, and everything continues to get stalled. So I would love, and I'll have a front seat row. I would love to see how this is going to play out in the springtime, when most companies are going to say, all right, it's time to come back. I want to see how we're going to manage that, and what human behavior we're going to start to encounter. So more to be seen.
Yeah, and I'm a born optimist. In a way, I really think that in a way we will get to a sweet spot, you know, where we have flexibility and high productivity. I hope everybody, all 200 participants plus of the webinar, enjoyed this as much as I have. Thank you, panelists, so much. Before you go, I just want to let everybody know that we're having our next is the Mic On webinar as early as next Thursday, a week from tomorrow, February 3rd. With Dave Ulrich. So for those of you who don't know, Maureen's smiling, she knows who he is. He's sort of the Michael Jordan of human resource management professors. And he's going to be joining us from California. And Christopher Altizer, one of our most successful adjuncts in our program, will be the guest moderator of that. I might be there for a second to introduce Chris. So this is something we're really excited about. We have a lot of questions we didn't get to. I'm so sorry, but I'm going to keep them perhaps right back to individuals on my own. But thank you guys so much. And thank you to my team here who's been in the background helping me with this. Good night. Good day, everyone.
Everybody have a great day. Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
All right,
Great.
bye-bye.